I want to thank everybody who has been part of this. I also want to recognize once again the remarkable job that Mother Moon has been doing all over the world and the impact that she has had and the network of friends and parliamentarians. And I commend Congressman Dan Burton for taking the lead and reaching out to literally several thousand parliamentarians around the world. This is a really important time because we're beginning to look at the world beyond the immediate pandemic. And I think that what President Carmona said was extraordinarily important, and I want to reinforce it from the perspective of a former American Speaker of the House. This is not a time for institutions to behave as though the pre-pandemic rules are automatic, ironclad, and can't be changed. We have to have the same kind of flexibility with countries, particularly with poorer countries, that we've shown in the American system, with companies, with small business. I mean, we've rigged all sorts of things in order to get through one of the greatest crises that we have faced. The combination of the pandemic itself, coming out of China, and with people having been misinformed, so it got much worse than it should have, and the decision by governments to deliberately create a depression, something as a historian I've never ever seen before. Those two coming together, the public health and human cost of the pandemic, and the fact that so many places have stopped. I can relate directly to the challenge of the Caribbean because I am currently living in Rome, where my wife Calista is the ambassador to the Vatican. Last year, the Colosseum had about 23,000 people a day. For 10 weeks, it had zero. Now, the economic impact on Italy, when you go from 23,000 tourists a day in hotels, taking cabs, hiring guides, going to restaurants, and they disappear, has been catastrophic. The same thing, I'm sure, is true of virtually every one of the Caribbean countries who are so heavily dependent on tourism. And it's true to a lesser but real extent to countries all across the region. So I want to mention very briefly two things. One, I do believe there should be a reset in terms of debt payment and other activities after the virus is gone. And we should not accept the idea that these big old institutions should stay rigid and unyielding and try to apply rules that will simply bankrupt countries. I think we have to be flexible and creative, and it may require financing that extends the life of loans by a generation, financing that reduces the interest rates. I think we also have to think creatively about how to restart tourism so people can go back out. I can tell you in Italy, after a very brutal 10 weeks where everything stopped, the only things that were open were gas stations, grocery stores, and pharmacies. And if you were on the street without a legitimate excuse, you could be fined up to $3,200. So for 10 weeks, Italy stopped. In the last 2.5 or 3 weeks, it's begun to restart. Restaurants are opening, hotels are beginning to open, museums are opening. And so we're beginning to see it start. But until the airlines are able to make people feel comfortable flying, until the cruise ships are capable of making people feel comfortable getting on the ship, places like all of the Caribbean are going to remain in economic pain, and they have to be dealt with, I think, in a genuinely caring and humanitarian way. The other thing from our standpoint is, and one that I think all of Latin America should look at, we have gradually begun to realize how much the Chinese are using loans that ultimately bankrupt countries and are trying to move in with extraordinarily favorable financing. And the US government in the last 6 months has begun to really take seriously how we can do a better job of helping with infrastructure, helping develop technology, helping create jobs. And frankly, I think given the American interest right now in not being dependent on the Chinese economy, there's a great opportunity to dramatically expand the amount of investment in Central and South America so that we are able to manufacture right here in our own hemisphere. And I would hope that that is something which will be taken up in a very serious way, and working together, that we will be able to actually create a much better economic pattern for the entire Western Hemisphere. And at the same time, if we can relaunch tourism, that will dramatically help. And then if we can have common sense, practical, humanitarian application of these debt agreements, I think we will get through the next 2 or 3 years and be in dramatically better shape. But I really appreciated President Kamaro's comments, and I thought he was exactly right on target.